Everything inside the palace just changed. Prince William's DNA test results were finally revealed. And the truth has thrown the entire royal family into chaos. What was supposed to be a private check has now become a dangerous secret that everyone is desperate to understand. Staff are whispering, phones are ringing non-stop, and every room feels clouded with shock. No one knows what this discovery will do to the family, the crown. But one thing is clear. These results have opened a door that cannot be closed, and the real storm is only beginning. Join us to explore the letter that changed everything. Prince William was in his study in Kensington Palace when the envelope arrived. He sat at his mahogany desk, sorting through the day's correspondence with his usual calm efficiency. He reached for his coffee, still warm, when his assistant knocked gently on the door. "Your Royal Highness, the medical documents you requested have arrived," she said, placing a thick manila envelope on his desk before quietly retreating. William nodded absently, his mind already on the morning's schedule. He had ordered a simple DNA test weeks ago. Nothing dramatic, just a routine medical clarification. His doctor had recommended something about genetic markers and family health history. He slid open the envelope with his letter opener, expecting perhaps 3 or 4 pages at most. But when he pulled out the contents, his brow furrowed. The stack was thick, far thicker than it should have been. He counted the pages quickly. 15. Why would a basic medical report need 15 pages? The first few pages looked normal enough. Standard medical jargon, charts with percentages, technical terms he barely understood. He skimmed through them, looking for the simple summary his doctor had promised. Then he turned to page 7 and his entire world stopped spinning. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. William read the line again, certain he had misunderstood. Then a third time. The words refused to change. They sat there on the crisp white paper, black ink spelling out something impossible, something that couldn't be true. His hands began to shake, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. The paper rustled in his grip. He set down his coffee cup before he could spill it, but he barely registered the action. His eyes were fixed on the document, scanning the technical language, searching desperately for some indication that this was a mistake, a clerical error. Someone else's report mixed in with his own, but there at the top of every page was his name, his birth date, his reference number. William stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. He walked to the window, pressing one hand against the cool glass, trying to steady himself. Outside, the palace gardens stretched peacefully before him, unchanged and unchanging. Gardeners moved about their morning duties. A security officer walked his regular patrol. Everything looked exactly as it always had, but nothing would ever be the same again. He returned to the desk, forcing himself to read more carefully this time. The document contained comparisons he had never requested, genetic profiles he had never asked to see, technical analysis of paternal lineage that went far beyond what his doctor had ordered, page after page of data that told a story he had never wanted to hear, had never even imagined could exist. One section compared markers against known royal family profiles. Another showed statistical probabilities that made his stomach turn. A third contained dates and reference numbers that suggested this testing had been done more than once by more than one laboratory, as though someone wanted to be absolutely certain of the results. William's mind raced through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Had someone made a terrible mistake at the laboratory? Had samples been switched, mislabeled, contaminated? But the report was so detailed, so thorough, checked and cross-checked against multiple databases. These weren't the findings of a single careless technician. This was a comprehensive, deliberate analysis. He thought of his childhood, his mother, the endless speculation and gossip that had surrounded the royal family for decades. Rumors he had always dismissed as tabloid fiction, the desperate inventions of journalists with nothing better to write about. He had grown up knowing that conspiracy theories swirled around his family like autumn leaves in the wind. Persistent, annoying, but ultimately meaningless. Except now he held evidence in his hands that suggested some whispers might not have been whispers at all, but truth spoken too quietly to be heard. William sat back down heavily, the leather chair creaking under his weight. He spread the pages across his desk, trying to make sense of the pattern, trying to find some logical explanation that would make this nightmare disappear. His training in crisis management, his years of military discipline, his lifetime of maintaining composure under pressure, all of it felt useless now. The office around him seemed to blur at the edges, the bookshelves lined with history texts and biographies of his ancestors, the portraits on the walls showing generations of his family, the royal crest embossed on his official stationery. Everything that had once felt solid and certain now seemed like stage props in an elaborate play where he had never known his real role. He picked up one particular page, studying a chart that showed genetic markers highlighted in yellow. The technical language was dense, but the conclusion was painfully clear. The probability percentages were stark. The comparison data was unambiguous. This wasn't speculation or theory. This was science, cold and precise and devastating. William's phone buzzed with a reminder about his next appointment, but he ignored it. He couldn't imagine sitting through a meeting about charitable initiatives or agricultural policy right now. He couldn't imagine making small talk with diplomats or reviewing budget reports. The ordinary business of his life felt impossibly distant. His thoughts turned to his father, King Charles, probably having breakfast at this very moment in his own quarters. Did he know? Had he always known? Was this why certain photographs from William's childhood had always carried an odd tension? Why certain family dynamics had never quite made sense? Why his mother had sometimes looked at him with such fierce protectiveness mixed with sadness? Or was his father as much in the dark as William had been 20 minutes ago? William strode toward the door. The report clutched tightly in his hand. His mind was made up. There was only one person who might explain this, who might help him understand how everything he thought he knew about himself could be so terribly, impossibly wrong. His father had to answer for this. Now the confrontation no son should have. William's footsteps echoed through the palace corridors as he made his way to his father's private office. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted with questions that shouldn't exist. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed too bright, too cheerful for what he was about to do. He didn't knock. Protocol demanded it. But this wasn't a moment for protocol. William pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. King Charles looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. He was reviewing papers, reading glasses perched on his nose, a cup of tea steaming at his elbow. Everything about the scene was ordinary, comfortable, familiar. It made what William was about to do feel even more unreal. Charles set down his pen, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. He could see this wasn't about policy or scheduling conflicts. Something had shattered. William crossed the room and placed the report on the desk between them. The pages seemed to glow white against the dark wood, accusatory in their silence. Charles picked up the first page, his eyes scanning the text. William watched his father's face carefully, searching for any sign of recognition, of guilt, of confirmation. What he saw was worse than he'd prepared for. Charles's expression crumbled from confusion to understanding to something that looked like fear. The king sank back into his chair, still holding the report. His hands weren't quite steady. He asked where William had gotten it. William's voice rose with frustration. That wasn't the question he needed answered, not whether it was true, not how to explain it, just where it came from. The question that mattered hung in the air between them, sharp as a blade. Was any of this true? Charles set down the papers and pressed his fingers to his temples. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched until William thought he might scream just to break it. There were rumors, Charles finally said. His voice barely above a whisper. Years ago, before you were born, even after, but they were just rumors, the kind that always swirl around this family. William felt his composure cracking. His father had known there were questions about this and he'd never said a word. Charles looked up, genuine anguish in his eyes. He explained how people invented stories about their family constantly, examining every photograph and public appearance for scandal. He couldn't take every whisper seriously. It would drive a person mad. William gestured at the report. This wasn't a whisper. This was science. This was evidence. Charles stood again, agitation making him restless. He pointed out something William hadn't considered. This report was far more comprehensive than a simple medical test. Someone wanted William to see this. Someone wanted to create exactly this moment. The thought stopped William. His father was right. The report was too detailed, too thorough for a routine medical inquiry. Someone had deliberately compiled this, made sure it reached him. But that didn't answer the fundamental question. William asked, if his father would have ever told him, if this hadn't landed on his desk, would he have lived his entire life not knowing there were doubts about who he really was? You are my son, Charles said firmly, meeting William's eyes. That has never been in doubt. Not for me, not ever. But that wasn't what William had asked. Charles walked to the window, his back to William. The morning sun illuminated the silver in his hair, made him look older, more fragile than William usually allowed himself to notice. He spoke carefully about the difficulties in his marriage, the periods of strain and distance. The whole world knew about those times. Yes, there were rumors during those difficult years, cruel, vicious rumors that hurt them both. But nothing was ever proven because there was nothing to prove. William demanded an explanation for the report. Charles turned back to face him. He couldn't explain it without understanding how it was created. Who authorized the testing, where the comparison samples came from? Genetic testing wasn't simple. This required access to royal family genetic profiles, historical samples, and extensive databases. Someone with significant resources and connections did this deliberately. William's mind was racing. His father's points were logical, but they felt like deflection, like a politician's answer to a journalist's hard question. What were they supposed to do now? Charles moved back to his desk, his expression hardening into something more resolute. They needed to consult someone they could trust. Absolutely. A genetic advisor with impeccable credentials and discretion. They had to verify this information through proper channels before reacting to it. They could not let this become public until they understood exactly what they were dealing with. William's voice was hollow. What if it was true? What if the testing was legitimate and the conclusions were accurate? Then we deal with it as a family, Charles said. But carefully, thoughtfully, not in anger or panic. William wanted to argue, to demand immediate answers that his father clearly couldn't provide. But underneath his hurt and confusion, he recognized the wisdom in caution. A scandal like this could tear apart everything they'd built, everything they represented. He told his father he needed time. Time to process this. Neither man noticed the shadow that moved quickly away from the corridor just outside. Footsteps retreating silently across the marble floor. Someone had heard everything, and soon the secret that should have stayed buried would begin spreading like poison through the palace walls. When secrets become headlines. The junior assistant had only been working at the palace for 6 months. She was young, eager, still amazed that she walked the same halls as royalty every single day. That morning, she had been delivering fresh linens to the upper floors when she heard the raised voices behind the king's office door. She should have kept walking. She knew that. But something in Prince William's tone made her pause, made her press closer to the wall, made her listen to words that were never meant for her ears. DNA report, paternal lineage, rumors proven. Her heart pounded as the pieces came together. She hurried away before anyone could catch her, but the information burned in her mind like a fever. By lunchtime she couldn't stop thinking about it. By afternoon she had made a decision that would change everything. She found the number online. A journalist known for royal coverage.